working. So this is the AI in Education podcast. Welcome, Dan. First of all, what have you been up to this week?
Oh, there's been a lot on this week, Ray. I've been doing some design thinking with some schools in Sydney. So we had some leadership teams in thinking about the way that AI is going to impact them. It was senior leaders looking at pedagogy across the school system in Australia. So it's really interesting, thinking of giving them some headspace to think outside the box a little bit without the rat race of the day-to-day running of the school. So I did some of that kind of thing. What about you?
I have been catching up because I've been traveling for the last 2 weeks doing lots of things. I'll tell you something interesting I did only yesterday was I created a podcast with my cloned voice, and somebody listened to it for 20 minutes and didn't realize they were not listening to me. That's good. Another one of those wow moments. Talking of wow moments, Dan, we have got the best guest ever on the podcast. And the reason I say that is, as you know, I've been in education technology for more than 4 decades. And since ever I started, I have known Stephen Heppell as the person that turns up and challenges a room full of people. If we had a dinner party, I think Stephen Heppell I would love to have on my left-hand side. I would love to have Paul LeBlanc on the right-hand side. I was lucky enough to have dinner with Paul LeBlanc from a higher education point of view. So this is my dream podcast, Dan, because we're going to go down memory road over the last 40 years, but also, the next few years of technology as well. So welcome, Stephen.
Well, yeah. Hello, everybody. No pressure then, I'll do the best.
Well, Stephen, I remember time. If I go right back to think about the early days of technology in education, it wasn't in any way technology that was created for education. It was technology that we looked at and said, oh my goodness, we can use that. I think of you as the HyperCard person. HyperCard in the Apple world wasn't built for education, but my goodness, it had so many opportunities.
Yeah, it really did. And I'll just go and see how far I can go back. I've got a badge hanging on the wall here. I've just pulled down. This was the microelectronics education program in the goodness knows when, at the dawn of time, And the fact that they called it microelectronics education was a sort of indicative of. But we were doing AI back then before HyperCard. This was we did it all with Prolog on clunky old Z80 computers, and it was. I keep seeing people appearing in the media saying, "Oh, he's the grandfather of AI." Not about me, about somebody else I've never heard of, And the people who were the heroes then, Jonathan Briggs, people like that, were doing amazing stuff. But AI has changed, and part of the conversation here, I think, is the way education hasn't, and it needs to catch up. AI is going faster than education at the moment, for sure.
So stepping back to just set to something, there's a question that I'd ask you. Though, known as well, like throughout the world, you've been working in Australia in some amazing learning spaces. And there is a reason for this question as well, because I'm interested to know where these classrooms of the future are going to be. And I hate using the word classrooms of the future, but tell me, please, what is the quirkiest or most interesting classroom that you might have been in recently?
Well, I'll meander to the answer because there are so many, and the key thing here is that every school, every community, every year, every opportunity is different. So there's no perfect solution. There's no perfect Formula One race car. I've been watching the J.J. Gilman's 18-foot skiffs race on Sydney Harbour, and there's no perfect team, they're all different. And some of the interesting ones, I was did a work in the Cayman Islands when Hurricane Ivan blew down all the schools. So the schools were all, the whole island was underwater, which is difficult, difficult challenge. Yes. And the kids were being taught in car parks, and gymnasiums and things. And when we started building the schools, they said, don't put us back in the boxes. We're loving this. So maybe an underground car park was a quirky start, We've just opened a school on the Red Sea coast in Saudi, Turtle Bay, and it's a really radical school. It's co-ed, which is interesting for Saudi, but it's also stage not age, like Linfield Learning Village near you. So stage not age, co-ed. That's a radical departure. Now, of course, it's in a war zone, so the things change, and today's funky school is tomorrow's concern. So I've been up a lot at nights, worrying about the kids and the parents and the teachers at the moment. But I think my favourite is literally on the doorstep here. I live on the east coast of England. I'm a great sailor, obsessed with sailing. And my eldest daughter, my middle daughter's a head teacher. Everybody in the family does education. But my eldest daughter runs the beach school here. And the beach school runs entirely on the beach. And it's for preschool children initially. And they sit down and they're doing marine science. They're looking at invasive species. They're looking at when the baby crabs appear and what point of the calendar that at the moment, jellyfish are turning up earlier than they should because of global warming and sea temperatures. And, they're really into this in great detail. And you see little 4-year-olds walking around with magnifying boxes looking at eggs and things, and they're building rivers in the they'll build a river in the sand with two different colors and watch when the two rivers meet. The colors don't mix, they run down together, and they start to get an insight into salt water and fresh water and so on, and it's the most fabulous thing. But the reason it's so good is because old people here, older than me, who were oyster fishermen, and oyster fisher women, nobody was interested in their history. They're just sitting there with all that knowledge, and suddenly the kids are chatting to them all the time. They come walking along the prom, they see the kids picking up the oyster shells, and they're saying, well, that's a native oyster. You can see how flat the shell is. And suddenly we've got a dialogue between history and future, and it's built around science, and there's no building, there's no capital at all. The whole thing's really interesting. She's a qualified teacher. Would have had her adopted otherwise, but she's a qualified teacher, and the cost of doing this is minimal. And we've been looking at doing the same thing in Colombia on the banks of the Amazon for the kids of the FARC. The FARC were the terrorist sort of people who lived in the jungle and came out with AK-47s and fought for what they can perceive to be freedom, and now they've got peace. They've got kids who've never been in school, and turns out there's a school on the banks of the Amazon looking at the wildlife, which is a bit livelier, A piranha's a bit more lively than a mullet, But same principle, same principle.
When you look at those, there's some amazing examples there. When you've looked at those learning environments, and then and the actual environments you're in, and then you then over the years, people have started to do a lot more project-based learning and different ways of assessment and standardized tests.
Yes.
Really haven't fitted some of those environments. When you've got all that experience of those environments and the different ways that people interact with learning new things, how do you think AI is going to land in classrooms, and where's this going? What is your gut feeling?
Well, I'll bore everybody with a few moments of history. I've got a bit of paper stuck on my wall here that takes me through the history of AI, and it's worth mapping that onto education, because it's not, they part, and those early days, when we were playing around with Prolog, students learned existing knowledge, and the whole trick of AI, the knowledge was out there. You had to try and give it to people who couldn't get it any other way. We built a welfare program in Liverpool to allow people to understand what they could claim for in benefits. And there was nobody alive who understood the benefit system well enough to be able to give them the best advice. So we built it, and then they had to shut it down because people turned out qualified for a lot more benefits than they were getting. And the budget was like, oh, there's no money. They're all claiming for everything they're supposed to have, So it was kind of knowledge is here, and the machine took you to it. Then the next step was machine learning, rule-based systems, and this was when Big Blue beat Gary Kasparov at chess. We went, "Whoa, computer can win." And at that time, that sense that we really had to have all the rules all learned, and that's when standardized testing came in. And if anything, the curriculum narrowed at that point because you couldn't learn it all. It's too much. It's a bit like chess. It would have been easier to learn drafts than chess because there are less rules. So standardized testing kind of brought it all down into a box. And then you get to a sort of deep learning briefly. This is around about the 2010s, somewhere around there. And the education's response to that really was to say, blimey, there's more to this technology than we thought. And so we started building maker spaces and teaching coding, and things like that. But they ended up being sort of on the side of the curriculum. You do history and you'd be learning about, siege engines, but you didn't go down to the makerspace and build a siege engine. The makerspace people were building Lego robots. It was a little contained, here's EdTech, and here's history. They didn't. And then suddenly we get to generative AI, which is where we are now, which, large language models, nobody quite knows what a large language model is, but it's just all the stuff. Suddenly, knowledge is not scarce. Knowledge is a free good. Knowledge is everywhere. And the professions that depended on gatewaying a pathway to knowledge, lawyers, for example, haven't got a hope. They're gone. They're all gone. So it's interesting then to say, well, what's left? What are the things? And it turns out what's left are the things that kids are really good at. It's ingenuity, it's collaboration, it's ethics. A class of kids where a kid does something inappropriate but they've got problems, the kids deal with it in a different way to when they do something inappropriate and they haven't got problems. Kids have got a very strong moral compass and it's slapped on their hearts. And that really matters. I don't know an AI that's got a decent moral compass at this point. And then ingenuity and creativity turn out to be hugely important. And of course, they're almost the opposite of what we're doing in schools. So schools have gone off down a compliance model. Here are the things you must do. And that compliance even extends to how you sit. We've got schools that say children must sit upright, it's what's slant, I mean, everything we know, everything science tells us is that sitting upright is about the worst thing you can do in terms of cognitive processes. You want to lie back and you have the blood flow around your body. If you sit upright, you put two right angles in and the blood struggles along in your brain. You can measure this. You can measure the blood flow of people's necks with a laser beam. We've got the data, but people don't take any notice of it, really. So the question of what should be going on in the classroom is basically all the things that are valuable. The things that teachers do on their induction day or their discovery day, or when the kids come to visit secondary school. What's science all about? They say, well, let's blow some stuff up. I've got a cabinet here full of gunpowder. Don't tell anybody, but I live with my grandchildren. We have quite a fruitful time blowing things up, but we had to learn to make the gunpowder from seagull droppings and all the other sorts of things, So that bit, we know it's valuable. The kids know it's valuable. And then we say, right, stop all that. Let's sit down and face the front and be compliant. And there is no job for a compliant kid. It's over. And I don't believe there's many jobs for compliant teachers either. I've been into schools where the teachers have a dress code. How mad's that? You want your teachers to be... We did a survey in the 90s. We said to people, what's your best learning experience? Best one. And we asked 1,000 people twice, if you see what I mean, two groups of 1,000. And it was kind of unashamedly constructive, this model of learning. They said, well, we learn through doing stuff. We do stuff with others. We have an audience for what we've done. And where's the audience for kids' work? These days, nowhere. But best of all, they said, we want our teachers to be a bit eccentric. We want them to be really passionate about poetry. when I was a school leader, one of the questions we always asked at interviews is, what do you do in the holidays? And if you're looking for a historian, you wanted somebody who did history in the holidays. And it's like, in the holidays, I work on my allotment. Right, next, I mean, you want people who are crazy about this stuff. And the kids knew it. They craved eccentricity, and we've almost extinguished it all. So put all that to one side, and then say, yeah, but practically, I'm a teacher. I'm here. I've got the kids. They're in the classroom. We've got the standardised test. What the hell do I do? And the answer is AI is flipping brilliant at it. Well, I was demonstrating this to a group in Spain. I'm professor in Spain these days. I was showing this to a group in Spain. And we sort of started off with, okay, I've got a group of young children, early secondary. They're just starting physics. So my prompt was, first of all, I want a hook. I want something that's going to catch their attention. And then I want a series of activities and worksheets. And I want those activities to be collaborative. We'll come back to that in a minute. I've got kids at different levels of engagement here. And I've got kids at different levels of understanding. So I want the activities and the support to be very differentiated. I want maybe a dozen different bits of paper rather than one, which I could never have time to do myself. And by the way, I've got a couple of kids from Somalia, so can I have all that in Somali, please, as well? And I want some little tests at the end of each activity, so I could do a little bit of reinforcement. We know how all that works. And can you give me that as a live form? And then when the kids do it, can you mark it and give it back to me? Well, that's all easy peasy. Free AI will do that for you in seconds, really. I mean, I was doing it live, in front of an audience of 1,000 people or so, and it came back in less than 10 seconds with everything, which was quite. But then it gets really interesting, because then you say, okay, could you now look at all the answers and look for patterns of understanding and misunderstanding, the places where they've all got it right, the places where we might be stretching them and go forward a bit, places where, and I've got a cohort that are getting this wrong, but not everybody does. So what is about that cohort? I get really good diagnostic stuff, and I'm just sitting here as the teacher, and all this stuff is happening for me. But I've got to know what questions to ask. I've got to be a learning professional. I've got to do prompt engineering. And I searched the other day. Well, I searched. I got DeepSeek to search as it happened. I said, look at all the teacher education curricula in the world, and come back with the degrees that are offering prompt engineering as a module. And you know what the answer is going to be, don't you? Nothing,
Yeah.
On the one hand, I've got my day-to-day stuff. AI is flipping brilliant at that. It does it, just takes the pressure off, frees you up. On the other hand, we've got policy and education. And it takes a long time to change. In medicine, they used to judge good doctors. They used to bleed people. They'd cut your arm and let the blood out, and the humours went down. And I've got diagrams here of the whole body. If you if you bleed people in the groin, you're gonna affect their ability to well, God knows. And they measured success by the number of times you bled the patient. But it didn't matter if the patient died. Patient dying wasn't a measure. So and here we are in education doing exactly the same. We're bleeding the little bleeders, with the standardized tests day in, day out. Nobody cares if that employs them. In Australia, here, Europe, we're all facing a crisis of, where do we get ingenious people from? We've got new problems appear every day. Nobody anticipated global warming being this fast. Nobody anticipated Trump, for goodness sake. Nobody anticipated, well, almost anything that happens and happens fast. And where do we get people with the ingenuity to solve those problems, it's got to come out of school. So the need for these people is vast, but just like with early medicine, the need for them to stay alive was vast. We didn't stop them doing the wrong thing. And, we're kind of stuck in that loop probably for another, 4 or 5 years, I'd say. It won't be a decade.
We've got that analogy as well. I think you mentioned just before we came on air now, where it was a lovely analogy you mentioned, a metaphor, where you said, it's like the students again on the train, and then the teachers are thinking, well, where's the train going? Is it going the right way? Should they begin on the train at all? So things are moving very quickly for teachers as well. So I feel sorry for the way the teachers have got to think quickly, but also try to be careful with integrity as well, because teachers underlying, and doctors, like you mentioned earlier on, there's an underlying integrity there that they don't want to damage learning and learning experiences, right?
Yeah, I'm a great fan of teachers, having been a teacher for long enough, and my wife was a teacher, my sister-in-law's a teacher, my brother's a teacher, my daughters are both teachers. So I like teachers, but I'm not very keen on policymakers. I've spent a lot of time with a few honourable exceptions. I thought your Adrian Pickley was fantastic. Actually, he really, when we were doing Linfield, he really understood the challenge. But they're far and few between. There's a reason for that. The current generation of policymakers grew up in that education system that came after machine learning. So they've done standardized stuff. They've learnt a narrow curriculum. There was nothing in their curriculum that presented them with the unexpected. Their teachers would brief them as they went into the exam room and literally would say, I hope there are no surprises on the exam paper. Well, we're in a world where the whole exam paper should be a flipping surprise, because otherwise it's not useful. So poor old politicians and policymakers, it's not their fault that they're stupid, but they are. And so who do we rely on? Well, we rely on teachers, and teachers rely on children. And that brings us to the agency of children. And time again, the analogy we were chatting about before we started was, on the station, the kids have all jumped on the train. They're all smiling at the window and waving, but like Harry Potter going off to Hogwarts for the first time, The adults are standing on the platform, as you say, I don't really know where that's going, maybe we'll try and get the kids off it because it might be dangerous, or, let's ban social media or whatever. Or they might say, I'll tell you, we'll get the next train. Well, the next train will be it'll be a different train, and listeners will be comforted by this. When we ran Ultralab, we had Ultralab's law, which said that there's a gap, and the gap is between the moment when policy denies technology at all. You'll both remember those early days when it was never going to happen. Multimedia, people with we'll give people knowledge on a video disc. They don't need to write their own, And then there's, now that's fine. We're happy with them denying it's ever going to happen. And then some years later, they did, oh, blimey, it is going to happen. We better ban it or control it. And this is when your politicians and ours will pop up and say, oh, we better take the phones away, or we'd better ban social media, or we'd better, when they're, look, I've got the Google Glass from the original Google Glass project, which are pretty cool, and now, of course, you can buy the damn things. Right. So what are they going to do? They're going to take the glasses off kids' faces and walk it into the wall, And so somewhere between denial and imposition is the space for subversion. And that's where we've built our careers, and where teachers mostly live, because if teachers weren't a bit subversive, they wouldn't have become teachers in the first place. But the mistake is then to fight against the moment when they lock it all down. Please let them have their phones. We don't care. What we're interested in is the bit that's coming next, which in this case is AI. And they're all saying, oh, AI won't have, we won't have AI class. Of course you flip it. It'll change the world radically. And we've probably got a decade before they realise what the thing's really going to happen, and they try and ban it. And by then, it won't matter. Apple's new earbuds, little white things, the The ones that come out in 97, next year, have got cameras in them. So they look at the environment you're in. You can have a little chat with your earbuds, which is pretty amazing. Well, they can't confiscate it, won't even see it. So we've got this little window of subversion keeps opening, and the trick is to stay in there and don't kind of try to battle. You won't win the unwinnable, it's all because the politicians are stupid, and that's not their fault. Luckily, teachers are clever, and even better, kids are even cleverer. My grandchildren live with me. I've got a 10-year-old just had her birthday, and a 13-year-old. So, they're a really, really interesting age. But I mean, the 10-year-old, this is a very geeky household. It's full of programmable toys and God knows what. But she's the one we rely on to fix things and get them going. It's way ahead of me, and we've taken agency out of education. What we've done in Spain is really interesting. One of the many projects we've done was to work with children on the design of their learning spaces. What could it be like? And to do that, they've had to research what are other people's learning spaces like? What are they? And they were amazed to find that in places like in Denmark, the kids climbing trees is on the curriculum. When I took a photograph and I was there of a kid flipping miles up, and they said, why did you take a photo? I said, well, when I show that photograph to teachers in England, they'll all have a heart attack, because, oh, by the way, the tree was in the middle of a dual carriageway, so the roads go past most of the kids up the tree. And they looked at me with astonishment. They said, but there are trees everywhere. If we don't teach them to climb safely, they'll be at risk. So other countries are seeing this in other ways. And nobody's right, but they're all different. So we got the kids to look around. Then we got the kids to mock it up in cardboard. We said, okay, there's plenty of cardboard around these days, good old Amazon, with loads of cardboard. So we said, okay, build your classroom of tomorrow in cardboard. And by the way, they put a sign on the door that said classroom of tomorrow constantly changing. So they knew that you didn't just build the classroom tomorrow and fix it, it was a process. So the classroom they built, you can imagine it had, open spaces, a lot of collaborative space and so on. But the whiteboard was cardboard. They had cardboard whiteboard. And they had cardboard iPads. And blow me down, it worked better. The kids, any which way you measured it, their results got better, including attendance and arrival at lessons. It turned out that kids role-playing future learning was better than current learning. They role-play space. They role-play knights of old. They role-play dinosaurs. Turns out they can role-play future learning. And they'd stand at the cardboard whiteboard describing what wasn't on it, And of course, you know what was happening cognitively, all the neurons were firing off and that. And it was just terrific. It was just terrific. So trust the kids. With all this space that AI's bought you, what do you spend all the time on? Just giving the kids agency and letting them rip, We did a project on brain food. And this was interesting too. What food should you eat to sharpen up your brain? People that say, oh, bananas, because you get potassium. Well, you could eat a banana today. It's not going to do much for you for 2 days, so it's not going to help you in your test. But turmeric and kimchi and olive oil, they all hit the spot straight away, Now, what was interesting with the kids, part of the research project, we brought in the catering staff, of course. And the first meeting, the catering staff all came. You know what dinner ladies are like, they're all ladies. They came in with sort of white coats with a bit of custard here and gravy. And they just come from the kitchen after lunch. We chatted to them about the way the food they were giving the kids could make the kids smarter. And it was like chucking a match in a box of fireworks. You could see their eyes light up. The next meeting, they all turned up in starched white, clean overalls, carrying a clipboard. They went from being dinner ladies to researchers in one meeting. And I think everybody wants to be part of this dialogue. if the dialogue is, how can everybody here be our best selves, then that's a pretty good project. And schools don't do that anything like well enough. Let me give you some examples. We do a lot of work measuring, I've got a box here. We measure the physical environment. We look at the CO2, the PM 2.5, the humidity, the temperature, the light levels. Interestingly enough, in here, since we've started talking, the CO2's gone up from 700 to 890. So just me breathing more vigorously as we talk is up the CO2. We know that when you put plants in, and we do BYP, bring your own plant. So the kids will bring their plant in. This one, you can see that's called Vera because it's an aloe vera. Kids quite enjoy naming the plants, but kids have then got some skin in the game. They come in, bizarrely they attend early because they've got a plant, And agencies is there all the time, but also the CO2 drops dramatically, and you can't vent it very easily because CO2 is a heavy gas. Kind of, if you open the skylights, the CO2 says, I'm staying. It doesn't climb the wall and jump out the window. You have to open the door to get it out, and not many teachers like teaching with an open door. So we put plants into 162 classrooms in Dubai. Dubai also having an unhappy time. Trump madness happening at the moment. But we put 162 classrooms and measured what happened. Well, obviously, the CO2 dropped profoundly partly because Dubai is really hot. So they tended to have the aircon running, but the windows shut. So they were chilling the air in the room, but not replacing the air in the room. But it worked really well. But we measured, obviously, academic progress. We measured everything, really. But also, the graphs were unequivocal. Everything got better. Maths got better. Science got better. English got better. But also we measured for each kid little subjective details about did they fidget or whatever, and those subjective, personalized, personal things all got better too. Now, two things to say from that. One is, why the hell isn't every school awash with plants? And by the way, the plants we picked, we got from NASA because NASA is thinking if we go to Mars, we'll need plants because plants do photosynthesis, they soak up the CO2, turn it back into oxygen. And NASA, as it happened, had a list of the 10 best plants, so we used them. But here's where AI gets really interesting because we generate a lot of data, and I'm sitting with these things. I'm sitting on about 3.5 million hours of school data, including I've been into 86 examination rooms and never found an exam room that wasn't damaging the kids' prospects, by the way.
Wow.
There's always, and unfairly, there's always a kid sat over there doing worse than a kid sat over here. Because this one's we did a school in Essex, a Fingry High School, and we took one classroom, worked with the kids on transforming it. One of the questions I asked at the beginning to the kids was, who are the kids who were getting a bit fidgety as we come up to lunch, kind of lost the plot a bit, falling off their chairs or whatever. And they all pointed to these boys in the corner. The boys in the corner pointed at themselves. It's us. Guilty as named, And I said, they were sitting in the dark corner of a badly ventilated room. Now, of course they couldn't concentrate. Then I said, well, so who are the kids who, at the end of the day, when the mums arrive, say, hang on, mum, just got to finish my dinosaur, kind of relax. And they all pointed to a group, mixed group, mostly girls, but a mixed group in the corner, the other direct opposite. And they were sitting by the window. The window was broken, so they were getting fresh air the whole time, just like the beach school kids do, 24/7, The light was terrific. So I said, okay, well, before we start, I'm going to swap you over for a couple of days. I want you to tell me what happened. One of the girls from the bright and bushy-tailed corner, when I put her in the naughty boy corner, I said, well, how are you doing? this was a couple of days later, she said, she kind of leant forward and slightly conspiratorially, and she said, I can feel myself going over to the dark side, which is a wonderful comment. But we're still building flipping classrooms with dark sides, And you think about, where's the equity for the kids who are doing the exam in the dark corner or by the window? I mean, there's something like 10 to 15% different in their scores just from where they sit. That's why standardized testing is doomed, because it's not standardized. It's sooner or later there'll be a class action from parents and say, you've done our kids down, and that's cost them 20% of their income for life. Can you give them $15 million each, please?
So Stephen, there's a frustration building in my head with this conversation because many of the things we're talking about are things that we've known for decades. We know that good quality air because of you. I've got one. I've got a CO2 sensor in my study because exactly the same thing. We've known these things, and we're just about to go into the next thing. Last Friday, I was with a panel of people from industry talking with universities, and the purpose was, what attributes do graduates need? Well, they need some technical skills, but let's be realistic about the workplace they're going to go into. Now it's going to be communication, collaboration, being able to work with people, critical thinking.
Ingenuity, all those things.
So important, which is currently not really in the assessment system in the way that an employer would recognize it. And they need some experience, which is a different problem altogether. We're just about to enter another age where technology is going to take a leap and a jump, and the gap is going to get bigger. If I'm a teacher in a classroom or I'm a lecturer in a university course where there is a regulated requirement that my students have to leave with, aren't we just adding more work?
No, it's just the opposite, really. And the reason that AI unlocks the door is it joins up the variables for us. I was sitting there talking to the kids about the CO2 and the light levels and so on. But I mean, why don't we collect that data en masse and then do the job of analysing it and looking for the unexpected correlations, really? I don't care about causality, but the correlations are always interesting. So I do a lot of work with elite sports. And I used to work with the England rugby team, not anymore. They're rubbish now. They should have kept me on. And I work with Olympic teams and so on. And it's really interesting because they've got a very simple: did we score a goal or not? Real Madrid, because the University of Madrid, so they're the local boys. Did we score 3 goals or 2 goals? Is what I'm watching. Teams on the pitch, if I'm watching Melbourne Victory or whatever, you can see the ones that have learnt well just by how they stand. When it's a set piece, half of them will run to where they think they should be, but if you watch, they're looking around for confirmation because they can't remember. So what we did with the England hockey squad, the girls' hockey squad, who'd never been on the podium before we worked with them, which we made over their learning space, but crucially, we made the floor a teaching space, and the walls were all writable, and screens were everywhere. It was data rich, data. And they suddenly realized that by looking at interpreting the data, they could see patterns and ways to have a silly example is with soccer, why are soccer players getting older? And the answer is they've got more information now, so they can't run as fast, but they're running in the right direction. So they run to where the ball's going to be rather than running behind it, if you see what I mean. The David Beckhams or whatever keep going a lot longer, and it's data, but we're not using that data in the classroom. So we need it. And that'll be the thing that unlocks the door. We're relying on, our best teachers pass some of this intellectually in their minds. They can spot kids' behavior. Girls' behavior might vary with their menstrual cycle. They can vaguely see that as teachers, but they maybe don't spot other things, And we can see all that from the data. and we don't. Let me give you a really silly example of data being ignored, which was during COVID. And COVID was an airborne disease. So you did catch COVID from touching things. You got it from breathing, the little hygroscopic little particles, little water drops, if you like. Well, that's where you caught it. And we know, for example, that if you flush a toilet, the water droplets go something like 5 meters from the bowl. So in Spain, we put lids on all the toilets, so that old school toilets, so that when they flushed, they didn't infect everybody in the space. No other country did that. The data was there, but somehow you want the data to be all there together. And the obvious bit about all that was the correlation between classroom layouts and teachers getting sick. If you sit, and we've modeled the airflow for this, if you sit all the kids in rows facing the front, which quite a lot of schools still do, not so many these days, but it's a bit like bleeding, still gets on. they're all breathing in the same direction, and you've created a flow of water droplets from back to front. You would predict that as a result, teachers would get more sick and be more likely to get long COVID because it's viral load. And that's what happened. That's absolutely what happened. Teachers were disproportionately sick. Also in the top 5, vicars, because in church with everybody singing at them, they haven't got hope. So we've got the data, but somehow the pieces of data, we've got all the bits of the jigsaw, but nobody knows what picture we're trying to make. We've got to put them together. What AI does is say, well, have you thought about this? Have you, look, here are the correlations. We're looking at our maker spaces across the set group that I'm part of. We've got maker spaces all around the world, Ireland, Qatar, everywhere really. And we were very early into maker spaces, and now we're sort of revisiting the maker spaces. And one of the questions we've asked, we like the fact that they all specialize in different things, as media here, robotics here, whatever. We've asked them all for a proper inventory of their stuff. And we didn't give them a form, we just said, tell us what you got. So some of them have given us Excel spreadsheets, some of them have given us pros, whatever. And there's quite a lot of them. So we just chucked all that into AI and said, look, can you have a look at this? Can you see any glaring emissions? Can you see? And by the way, if we look at that and compare it to results in some of the tech-based standardized tests, can you see a correlation between what they've got and what they're performing? Dear old AI goes off and does all that for us. We could not do that ourselves. So we've been shooting in the dark a bit, and now we're not. But now people have got to learn to use the AI. They've got to ask the questions, and that's the tricky bit, I think. Prompt engine.
Do you know what? You've just filled another seat for me at my dinner party, because the next person that needs to be at that dinner party is Sugata Mitra.
Well, he's a good friend.
I always think of you two together, because there will be all those conferences where they'd say, well, we had Heppell last year, we'll have Sugata this year, and then we're going to have Heppell the year after. But I remember the most powerful thing that he talked about that stuck in my mind even until now, and this is 25 years ago, was, I don't know, why don't you go and find out? And it was the thing he said to the kids that was basically, I don't know, you go and find out, and they would head off to Wikipedia. And hearing what you're talking about now from a data point of view, they don't need to head to Wikipedia to look up facts. What they can do is, okay, how do I build a data machine? How do I build a sensor for CO2? How do I do this analysis? They'll be able to do that as a 10-year-old with some help from AI to do something that would have taken a data scientist 5 years ago.
That's exactly right. And when COVID struck, I was sitting on some committee, I forget, I have to sit on these things from time to time. I don't pay much attention, to be honest, but I'm sitting there, and somebody said something, well, you can imagine, and somebody said something pretty sniffy about kids. Oh, they're all out of school. It's going to be the lost generation. It's going to be a disaster. They'll be unemployable. And I thought, I'm not entirely sure I believe that. So we set up a thing called the Golden Generation, where we just asked kids, well, you're out of school for COVID, what are you doing? And they told us. And 3 things came out of it. One, they were all doing something. Now, for a few kids who were stuck at home in a household with an abusive father, being trapped in there was hell on earth, and there's no disguise it. But there weren't many of them. Most kids were in freedom. I remember one parent said at one point, I said, what's your son been doing? She said, well, he's taught himself plumbing and he's installed our central heating, which, you can imagine in England, that's kind of handy. And he said, now he's round the neighbours sorting out a new boiler for them. And he was 13. And
Wow.
second thing we saw was kids were all doing the things they weren't supposed to be doing yet. That
Yes.
teacher at school that said, oh, I can't tell you that yet. We come to that when you do A-levels. Or if you do this as a degree, you might find out about that. They just wanted it now. And second thing was they had an audience for what they did. Not many of them just sat in a cupboard and did it. They showed off what they did. And thirdly, mostly doing it with others. Actually, in terms of Australia, this is really important because one of the things that AI doesn't do very well is membership, belonging. It's a one-on-one thing, and it has to be different. Now, Australia's rich history is of teams, great teams. If you think about sport, all your heroes came out of teams. 1983, Australia 2 won the America's Cup. You don't just think John Bertrand, you think of everybody else on the boat. Or a cricket team, you don't just think of Shane Warne and everybody else in the team. You've got a few, Kathy Foster, I can't remember. You've got a few one-off heroes, but they're few and far between. Yeah. The sprinter. What was her name? I can't remember.
Kathy Freeman.
Kathy Freeman. That's it. Freeman. It started with an F. S. So they're. You've got a country whose entire economic success rate is built on collaboration and membership, which probably owes something to the history of the country. People arriving and having to get together to survive and so on. But it's hardwired into the cerebral cortex, isn't it? And along comes AI and some of the current curriculum and tries to turn it into an individualized thing. And that will damage you immeasurably. At the moment, you're probably leading the field. When did you last have a successful Formula One driver? I guess Mark was, I suppose, but not many, But teams, flipping millions of them, and that's really strong. And when I work with kids in Australian schools, the quality of dialogue between them is always fabulous. When we were doing that project on redesigning your own space, we then asked the kids to come into the university and design the university space that will be one they would want to come to. And again, lots of cardboard, and they built, all the things that they found successful in their own classrooms, And one of the kids came over to me and he said, I've been in 7 schools in my life. His parents moved around a lot. He said, this is the first time anybody's asked me how it could be better. And then he said, he said, we've always known. It right was,
Wow.
I know we're coming up to time, and I know you've got other stuff today, but I'd like to ask you one more question before we go on. I know this is a big one. What's your take, just generally, on the assessment and AI kind of debate? Do you have a point of view on that? Because you've touched on some of it already.
So I mean, the history tells us that every bit of technology that comes along, they think is going to be damaging to assessment. I remember long conversations about word processors making writing easy for children because it could check their spellings or whatever. What we actually found was that word processing allowed kids to take risks with their learning. They could try out a poem and then edit it a bit and try, so that their learning got better, not worse. And then the same happened when Google came along. People tried to ban Google. Remember, they said, "Oh, kids will just Google all their homeworks and that'll be the end of that. They've got to know how to use an encyclopedia, you know. And now teachers are saying, for God's sake, haven't you looked it up? Yoga is a baseline skill. You shouldn't even be allowed in the door without, you know. So this always happens. People panic about the new technology damaging the old assessment, and then they realize that the kids get better and better at it. Makes me laugh. In universities, they're great. So you can get your essay written in about 3 minutes these days, but it looks a bit like an AI essay. But luckily, there are websites who do nothing but turn your AI essay into something a bit more, you know, human. They put in a few spelling errors, and so when you hand it, so at that point you think maybe the essay wasn't the best way to assess knowledge. And actually, then, if you look at our assessment system, there are lots of places where we do it better. For example, in architecture, you graduate with the crit. You build a display of all the stuff you've done over your 4 years, and architects come in and look at it, and you say, my daughter, before she went off to be a head teacher, was an architect. It turned out to be a useful background. And I think in all the years she did architecture, I don't think she ever drew a straight line. You know, it was all wiggly and wobbly, you know. And so sort of showed it off as like a chef showing off a table full of jelly, you know. But it didn't matter. The point was the audience and the conversation. There was no essay. And essays, as you know, were only introduced by Oxford University because they hadn't got enough people to do the vivas, you know. And so I said, oh, okay, don't ask them what they know. Tell them to write it down. That'll save us the employment. You know, so the essay was only a stopgap, really. It's not a very good one. And so, you know, what happens is there are better ways of doing it. There are always better ways of doing it. Nobody passes a drama degree by writing an essay about it, and so on. You know? And
True.
And now, why that's really interesting with AI is because we want collaborative teams. You know, we want a kid who's full of good ideas but never finishes. We want a kid who's really organized. We want a kid who's really good at curating and archiving all the steps so we can go back. We want, you know, you project for 5 kids, you want 5 different skills. And AI can support each one of them in their specialism and thus support the team in all coming together. And then next time you roll the dice differently and maybe they try a different skill. But kind of doesn't matter if you're really good at that archiving and organizing job. You know, there's going to be plenty of jobs for you in the future too. You know, so what we've tried to do is build these sort of people who are good at their boxes, and actually we want people who are just good, and AI helps us to get there for sure. And the same thing around whatever comes next, you know.
That's really fascinating. But do you know the student I'm not going to stop thinking about for the next 5 years is that 13-year-old that mastered central heating, because in 5 years' time they are going to be laughing career-wise compared to some of the more academic subjects.
I'm doing a lot of work with further education colleges at the moment, and you know the ball has fallen into their court, hasn't it? Really, because technology-rich skills are the thing of value. Because every plumber comes to we bought the house next door and rebuilt it. So we got somewhere to put the grandchildren in. And every plumber who came to the door had a laptop. Every electrician who came to the door had a laptop. You know, everybody who designed the roof trusses had a laptop. So they're all old skills plus tech. And those jobs are going to be around for a long time. But the person who managed the accounts haven't got a hope, have they? They're gone.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for spending time with us today. Your wisdom in this area, you know, and the impact you have in, you know, and I've had, but I still having across the world with innovation and driving challenging thoughts to everybody. You know, everybody respects you so much, and thank you for all the hard work you've done in that area. And thanks for coming on our little old pod.
I would say a closing sentence to everybody on board for this, and that is that it ain't over yet. You know, we know what's right, and we've got to fight for it. You know, and if I look around the world at the kids in Gaza or Kashmir or at the moment in Iran, you know, there are kids everywhere who are just having the most torrid time with their learning. And, you know, with our wealth and our stability and our opportunities, we have a moral duty to make learning better for them. And if all we're doing is the same old learning we were doing, we know that's failed all those kids. It's time to turn the tap and get them flowing into it as well. So, thanks for your kind words. Get out there, get stuck in, and change the world.
Thank you, Stephen.